What is up, guys? James with First Home Inspectors here. I'm going to roll out a new content pillar for the IRC 2024. The IRC is a building code, and compared to just regular home inspecting that I do, this code is more black and white. And this is what people are referring to as pass-fail inspections. Like, did it pass code? Did it not pass code? Is this code compliant? And all these terminologies all come from the IRC, the International Residential Code. New certification I'm getting. And yeah, I think it'd be great. All right. The reason I'm doing this is to be the solution to a problem. And the problem that I was facing when I was learning this stuff is that no one actually just straight up just teaches what's in the book. What you end up getting is just people telling you how to pass a test. And with this test in particular, it's almost like you can pass it without knowing anything. And I don't like that. I don't want to have some certification that kind of misrepresents my skill set. And so I'm creating this content as a way to like actually talk about the ideas in the code so that it's easily accessible to other people and also myself, because I hate reading that book. It's very difficult to get through, but summing it up into the main ideas is better than refusing to pick up the book and not learning anything, if that makes any sense. Another thing on point number 3, this is something I'm making for myself, and I figured I'd share with other people around my skill level and experience. I got a degree in construction management. I was doing pretty big projects for 4 years, did land development for 2 years, and then I've been running this company, and we've performed over 1,000 inspections for the past few years as well. So they're primarily talking to people around my skill set. And that being said, contractors would probably find this useful. This is not made for homeowners, and I'm not going to really dumb down the jargon to have it be understandable by homeowners. It's going to be simply too difficult, and we're going to get caught up in talking about what a nail versus a screw is versus talking about TJIs or something like that, right? The next thing is I'm a generalist. I am not a licensed plumber, mechanical expert. I'm not a carpenter. None of these things. I do have overall project construction knowledge, and I would say quite a bit of that. But specialists are going to know more than what I know in any particular field. When we talk about plumbing, a plumber is going to know more than I do, right? Mechanical, same deal. And that theme is going to be there the entire time. There's no way around it. That being said, if a plumber decides to make a whole series on how to get through the plumbing code, go for it. I'd rather watch your content than watch mine. But for now, something's better than nothing, and I think these videos are going to just help out the entire industry. Um, I think they're just going to help out the entire industry. So that is why I'm making them. So to go into the first section here, we got IRC 2024 R101 General Scope and Requirements. And so the key points of this, right, is that any alteration into dwelling units between 1 and 3 stories above grade or taller must, it's like this code just deals with stories that are any dwellings that are between 1 and 3 stories. So once you get up to a 4-story building, then it doesn't count anymore, right? You go onto the IBC, which is the International Building Code. Kind of funny is that if you run around town and you see a lot of 3-story buildings, that's why. And you can also see that there's not requirements for elevators and stuff in 3-story buildings, but you'll start to see that once you get up to 4-story buildings, because then they start using the IBC, which is the commercial code. The benefit of using the IRC is that the IRC is a simpler code to read through and understand, and it also has less strict requirements than you would see in the IBC. So put things for example, and when you are in a residential dwelling, when you're in a dwelling, you don't have the need for accessibility. It doesn't need to be ADA compliant. You can have your building be non-ADA compliant, which is why you don't see grab bars when you go to bathrooms. It's also why you don't see ramps going into people's houses necessarily, right? That's a pretty few and far between thing, whereas if you were in a commercial building, you would have to see those things. You would need to have all that. So that idea is that the IRC is a cheaper way of building a building than the IBC is a great reason to try to stay code compliant with the IRC, especially for building houses. And the next thing is that, let's say you decide to sprinkler it, right? If you decide to sprinkler these dwelling units for the following things I'm about to list out, you can use IRC. So if you create a lodging house, which is they consider basically like an Airbnb, where the owner lives in one of them and they have 4 or 5 other units sit there that are all like individually owned by other tenants, then you can use this code. Considering, I mean, being that the whole building is sprinklered. The next thing is if you have like any like these medical care facilities where you like take care of old people or sick people, then you can, as long as you have less than 5 people in that house and it's sprinkled, you can use the IRC too. So with that idea in mind, if you sprinkler a house, you can turn it into these types of buildings according to the IRC, right? That being said, there may be some like code requirements that are specific to all these other adjacent industries that I can't cover here. Like, let's say you are like a group home or something that department has its own thing. So don't come at me like, oh, you didn't tell me that, blah, blah, blah. Like, this is what the IRC says, right? That they still like the general things. Okay. Here we got IRC 2024 R101 general scope and requirements. And so the key points of this, right, is that any alteration. Next one, applicability. And this is all about like key points or conflicts. What this code basically says is that it has a couple ideas. This code is going to reference other building codes and other like standards like ASTMs. I don't even know the other ones, but ASTMs are one of them, right? When that comes up, this building code says use the IRC requirement instead of that other one's requirement. It's kind of funny. I don't get why they say that, but they say it. The next one, if there's one of the bigger ideas, is that if you are in between a vague requirement and a strict requirement, and they appear to sound conflicting, you need to go with the stricter requirement. And the last one is that building additions need to be compliant with the current code, while the existing building does not, unless the property management code says otherwise. So this is a question I get a lot from homeowners and stuff, and like friends of mine that like see me at parties and they want to talk about building requirements. They're making an addition. That new structure needs to be code compliant. The old one can stay exactly the way it is. A couple exceptions to the rule is that when the new building starts affecting the code compliancy of the old building, then that's when we have an issue. So let's say we put a building attachment right outside the secondary egress ID, essentially a window for a bedroom, right? Well, now that secondary egress isn't there anymore. So it affects the first building, right? And that the first building's ability to have egress, and now your first building isn't compliant anymore. So that's where the two worlds kind of come at play. The general idea is that if you're not messing with something, you don't need to make a code requirement. There is one exception to this rule, and that's the International Property Management Code. So unless the property management code says that buildings need to be upgraded to have X, Y, and Z in them, that's really the only time that you need to like kind of go retrofit a building without having, touching it, right? That's really about it. Next one, applicability. And this is all about like key points or conflicts. What this code basically says is that it has a couple ideas. This code is going to reference other building codes and other like standards like ASTMs. I don't even know the other ones, but ASTMs are one of them, right? When that comes up, this building code says use the IRC requirement instead of that other one's requirement. It's kind of funny. I don't get why they say that, but they say it. The next one, if there's one of the bigger ideas, is that if you are in between a vague requirement and a strict requirement, and they appear to sound conflicting, you need to go with the stricter requirement. And the last one is that building additions need to be compliant with the current code, while the existing building does not, unless the property management code says otherwise. So this is a question I get a lot from homeowners and stuff, and like friends of mine that like see me at parties and they want to talk about. Next one, R103 Code Compliance Agency. This is a short section of gobbledygook, and when you end up reading it, you can tell that they put the section in there so that it's really easy for them to say this is the law of the land. And basically what it says is, and then insert blank, City of Las Vegas, will be compliant with the IRC code, and our building official is X, Y, Z, and our building agency is called this. That's kind of what it says. Maybe one of the better ideas is that there's one person called the building official, and they're allowed to disseminate their authority throughout other people. And so that's where you start to see inspectors come in, technical officers, and all that. If me and you lived in some random town in the middle of nowhere where our building department is like one guy, that is a thing. And you just have one guy. But as it gets bigger and bigger, like if cities get bigger and bigger, they have more and more people out there. And that's basically what it's saying is that this one person is allowed to delegate their power and authority, responsibilities to other people as well. And this building official person will get referenced here and there, and they have the ultimate authority on all that. Next one, R103 Code Compliance Agency. This is a short section of gobbledygook, and when you end up reading it, you can tell that they put the section in there so that it's really easy for them to say this is the law of the land. And basically what it says is I, and then insert blank, City of Las Vegas, will be compliant with the IRC code, and our building official is XYZ, and our building agency is called this. That's kind of what it says. Maybe one of the better ideas is that there's one person called the building official, and then they're allowed to disseminate their authority throughout other people. And so that's where you start to see inspectors come in, technical officers, and all that. If me and you lived in some random town in the middle of nowhere where our building department is like one guy, that is a thing. And you just have one guy. But as it gets bigger and bigger, like if cities get bigger and bigger, they have more and more people out there. And that's basically what it's saying is that this one person is allowed to delegate their power and authority, responsibilities to other people as well. And this building official person will get referenced here and there, and they have the ultimate authority on all that. Next one, R103 Code Compliance Agency. This is a short section of gobbledygook, and when you end up reading it, you can tell that they put the section in there so that it's really easy for them to say this is the law of the land. And basically what it says is I, and then insert blank, City of Las Vegas, will be compliant with the IRC code, and our building official is XYZ, and our building agency is called this. That's kind of what it says. Maybe one of the duties and powers of the building official, that's R104. And so the building official is allowed to interpret a code and has the authority to say whether something is or isn't compliant. So there will be times where, I said it was a black and white, and it is a little more black and white. But let's say you have a notch out, a bore that's 5/8 away from the face of the stud. Some might say that that's actually a 1/4 inch away from the stud. And maybe not it's 5/8, maybe it is, or maybe it's 6/8, right? The building code official has the final say on what that is. I know if you think it's a measurement, you can see once you get that small, the thickness of the lines start to affect you a little bit. The code will also call out listed materials and methods. Listing standard and manufacturer's instructions need to be made to the building official. So if you decide, if the building code says, hey, you have to build per manufacturer's instructions, I don't think this really happens all that often, I swear. But if you decide, if it does say build per instructions, technically you need to have those instructions available to the building inspector when they come on site to inspect your stuff. How often does that happen? I have no idea. I honestly just think people just build the same way they always built, and they don't really do too many crazy ththings anymore, and almost everything's involved in the code. Especially when you're building in Las Vegas, there's not a whole bunch of new stuff that's coming out. we're putting in the tiles, we're putting on stucco on it, and we're painting the house brown or beige. So we're not doing too many crazy things. And there's not a lot of new construction technology that's making its way out there, and there's a beauty to that. Let's see. Next one, the alternates. The alternates, if you decide to alternate a building method, then you need to have it compliant with, you need to ask the building official if it's okay. The alternate needs to be compliant with the intent of the code. This is probably the most valuable nugget that's in this entire video. There's a book called, I have it on my shelf here, 2021 Code and Commentary. If you get the Code and Commentary book, it will tell you pretty plainly what the intent of the code is, so you can't really misinterpret it. It's also built at a much easier reading level than all this other stuff is. They make it very easily digestible, and they actually tell you, hey, here's why we have this rule in place. And it helps you remember what's going on in the code probably better than really anything else I can think of. So Kind of gonna cut the video off here, and I will create a new video in the next few days about the next sections. If you found this helpful at all, I know we're going through just administrative stuff and it's kind of boring, but if you like the idea of this content pillar, help like give me a shout, let me know, and I will certainly create more of this. If you are a specialist and you have something you want to add to the conversation, I'm not preaching to be God here. You guys can talk about whatever you want to talk about in the comments, and we can add to the discussion, and we can all get better at learning the code. So thanks. All right, guys, for today's video, we're going to go over R105, which is permits. And this is actually a pretty long section. It took me, I think, an hour or two to kind of make this PowerPoint and do some research. So hopefully you guys enjoy this and learn a lot from it. So the first thing is, what is a permit? And a permit is an official document that certifies or document or certificate that issued by the building official that authorizes performance of specific activities. So once again, a permit is an official document or certificate issued by the building official that authorizes performance of a specified activity. And you'll kind of see the purpose of this is that they just don't want people going out there building stuff kind of willy-nilly. What can happen a lot of the time is that you'll have people that are unqualified to do a certain task, and they'll try to get it done, and they don't realize what danger they're kind of putting society in, right? You'll also realize once you kind of get out there, kind of see what I do, is that there's some people that don't realize how their work affects other scopes of work. I think a decent example of this is like it's pretty easy to install a water heater inside someone's home, but if you know, like literally inside the building thermal envelope, but if you do that, you can put them at a higher risk of carbon monoxide poisoning, and that's the kind of stuff that people don't realize because they just wouldn't know. How would they know that? And that's kind of the stuff that we're talking about here, and the kind of issues that we're trying to prevent from happening. Kind of mysterious and elusive, and I think the main idea is just to keep all the buildings safe and not falling apart and functional and all that. All right, so permits must be filed when you add or make changes to a building. They must also be filed when you make changes or replace any MEP system or appliance. So we have a lot of examples for this and things that permits are not required for. So first one is fences that are under 7 feet tall. When I am out inspecting, I see fences that are typically around 4 to 6 feet tall. So 7 feet tall is a bit high. The next one is retaining walls shorter than 4 feet. Measure from top of footing. Very important distinction there. So yeah, these, if you have a 4-foot retaining wall, I mean, I'm like 5'8", so it kind of goes up to like, what is that, like my rib cage or something? That's, let me think, it's a foot shorter. Yeah, like just below my armpit, I would say, or maybe something like that. So pretty tall retaining walls, and naturally the idea, if you didn't know this, like retaining walls are under a lot of pressure, and there are stories of people actually getting crushed by retaining walls that topple. And yeah, you don't want to be in that situation for a retaining wall that's not designed by an engineer. It's just someone's buddy that's like, oh yeah, I can build that. They don't realize what danger they're putting people in. Next one, sidewalks and driveways. So you don't need that. Although I will say, if you are building a sidewalk or a driveway, just make sure you get the pitch right for that. And ideally, you want 6 inches of fall in the first 10 feet of a building. Or another great idea is 2%. So kind of mix those two things. Just make sure that it doesn't pitch back towards your home. Try to get 6 inches of fall in 10 feet. And if you're a cross slope, at least at like 2%, it's always a good idea, in my opinion. Next one, painting, tiling, papering walls, prefab. Painting, tiling, or papering walls. Don't need it. Next one is prefab swimming pools less than 24 inches deep. So yeah, if you have a kiddie pool, you don't need to do that. I think most other pools are going to require a permit. Decks that are under 200 square feet. To put that in perspective, your garage is likely 400 square feet. So if you have a deck that is under 200 square feet, that is half of your garage. Or the size of one parking stall is another great way to put that. And awnings that protrude under 54 inches. And so I would say, I think most people in America are like 5'8", 10, I believe. And your arm span is roughly the same as your height. So if you stick your arms out, that's how you can get a pretty big awning. Like if you think about it, that is a actually pretty massive awning you can have out there. So those are all the things on this slide. So once again, a permit is an official document that certifies or certificate that's issued by the building department that authorizes performance of specified activities. You have to file for a permit when you make changes to a building. Right now, we just talked about all the ones that are under the building permit category, which are the fences, retaining walls, sidewalks, painting, tiling, papering walls, shallow swimming pools, decks that are small, under 200 square feet, and awnings. Those are all things that you don't need a building permit for. And in that case, just assume that everything else you're going to do to a building is going to require a permit. The next part of this, in contrast to building permits, funny enough, are MEP permits, and we'll get to that in the next slide. So the first of the MEPs is actually going to be E, and that's kind of what the code talks about first. And so electrical permits don't need to be applied when you're doing cord and plug temp lighting. So I guess if you're just doing holiday lighting for people and just lighting up the outside of their house, don't need to pull a permit for that. Reinstalling attachment plugs, but not outlets. This is something I'm actually not really sure what they're talking about. I can't honestly tell if they're talking about the actual plug for something or if they're talking about the actual outlet itself. But I want to say it's probably the cord because the outlet sounds like. All right, I'm just going to take this one from the top again, Marcel. So next one is electrical permits that don't need to be pulled. So cord and plug temp lighting, if you are doing a home or a Christmas lighting scheme, you don't need to do all that. Reinstalling attachment plugs, but not outlets. So if you are, funny enough, just changing out, I guess, the inner housing of what's in an outlet J box, right? The thing that you like, you take the cover plate off, you see those two little circles with the three little, like the two little smiley face things in them that you put the plug in. Apparently, you can replace those without a permit. Who knew? The next one is overcurrent protections devices. So if you're replacing a GFCI, they don't need a permit for that. Replacing appliances that consume less than 50 watts of energy. I did some research on this, and it's pretty much every appliance besides your FAU and your condenser. I'm sorry, actually, just your condenser. Based off that definition alone, it's just your condenser. Um, the other one is minor repairs of replacements of lamps or temporary or permanent equipment receptacles. So if you have like an outdoor light fixture, like say on the side of your garage or something like that, on the outside of your home, you can go ahead and replace that and not really be too worried about. You don't need to pull a permit for that. Whether it's temporary or permanent, as long as you're not like adding in a whole new light fixture out there, you don't need to pull a permit for that. So the first of the MEPs is actually going to be E, and that's kind of what the code talks about first. And so electrical permits don't need to be applied when you're doing cord and plug temp lighting. So I guess if you're just doing holiday lighting for people and just lighting up the outside of their house, don't need to pull a permit for that. Reinstalling attachment plugs. All right, next one is gas. So gas permits don't need to be pulled for portable heating, cooking, or clothes drying appliances. So I don't really know of too many clothes drying appliances that are like portable, honestly. I think everyone just has like the one that you just stick in your laundry room. Portable cooking though, I find really interesting because I mean, I guess if you're installing like a Traeger or something, you're hooking up like a barbecue in your backyard. I guess you don't need a permit for that. Those things can move around. I guess they'd be deemed as portable. I think once you make the transition and you have the appliance that's like fixed, not the one on wheels, like you have a grill that's like going to be hanging out there for a long time, you're going to need a permit. But outside of that, you do not. And then portable heating. So you go to like people's backyards and they have those like stands. Like they kind of look like poles, but they actually emit heat. And you'll see them at like Opportunity Village and stuff like that. Don't need a permit for that. So yeah, I find that real interesting. But in contrast, if you're installing a fire pit, like that's going to need a permit because that's going to be there for a long time. If you're installing an outdoor grill, that's going to be there for a long time, and like a whole cooking setup that I'll see in kind of like the nicer areas, that's going to need one. And whatever this portable clothes drying appliance is, I have no idea what that is. I can't even, I have no idea what that is. Just put your stuff out in the sun. The next one are minor repairs to equipment. So under the gas permits, gas permits you don't need to pull. If you're making minor repairs to equipment that aren't going to make it more dangerous or anything, you don't need to pull a permit for that. And I think some ways to think about that are like if you're fixing like the sheen on some gas appliance, don't worry about grabbing a permit. And the last thing is portable generators. So if you got a portable generator, you don't need a permit to mess around with that. All right, next one is gas. So gas permits don't need to be pulled for portable heating, cooking, or clothes drying appliances. So I don't really know of too many clothes drying appliances that are like portable, honestly. I think everyone just has like the one that you just stick in your laundry room. Portable cooking though, I find really interesting because I mean, I guess if you're installing like a Traeger or something, you're hooking up like a barbecue in your backyard. I guess you don't need a permit for that. Those things can move around. I guess they'd be deemed as portable. I think once you make the transition and you have the appliance that's like fixed, not the one on wheels, like you have a grill that's like going to be hanging out there for a long time, you're going to need a permit. But outside of that, you do not. Okay, mechanical permits don't need to be pulled when we're doing portable heating, cooling, or ventilation equipment. That one's tough. What are they? Okay, you got an electric heater that you're going to be running around the house with and relocating all the time. Okay, you don't need that. Um, Cooling equipment that is portable. Okay, I've seen AC systems that you can pull from room to room. You can buy it from Home Depot and shove them out your window. Kind of not like a package unit, a package window unit, but it's got like it's got some sort of like duct on the back of it and it sends the air outside. So those guys apparently don't need it. All right, I can see that. Ventilation equipment, typically that's referring to, gosh, like a fan. So I can actually pretty easily see that. So if you have portable heating, cooling, or ventilation equipment like I just described here, you don't need it. Minor repairs to equipment. And they keep using this minor repairs thing. And what they're trying to talk about is like, as long as you're not messing with something that's going to like reasonably put people in danger, then you're good. So like, once again, like the housing is something, the chain of something, like that kind of stuff is not your permit. I think if you're going to put like another, like replace the door on an FAU, like the access door, probably don't need a permit for that. Like there's some level of like reasonableness, I believe. Um, Portable swamp coolers do not need a permit. Pretty easy to kind of follow that whole idea there. If you have a fixed one though, you will need a permit for that, and I think that's important to call out. The fixed ones that are like stationary, like they usually get shoved out of like people's windows, or they get shoved like people will cut a hole in their wall and they'll install one, and that's a good thing to remember. And that's something I actually see on maybe a somewhat regular basis. Swamp coolers that get put in after the fact, and I'm almost certain that they're not being permitted. And I can already tell those guys are probably just messing up their houses installing those things. Small HVAC systems with less than 10 pounds of refrigerant and less than 1 horsepower. That's the last thing for mechanical that it says you don't need to pull a permit for. And I did a little bit of research on that. What I'm seeing online, I see like this Mitsubishi mini split when I go out to people's houses, and ductless mini split. And I typically see that like I put like the model number in. That thing takes about 3 pounds of refrigerant per ton. So by that definition, as long as it's under 3 tons, then we would be under the refrigeration requirement. However, we quickly get over that on the horsepower thing. So when an HVAC system is over, requires more than 1 horsepower for the compressor, then it's not considered a small HVAC system anymore. So we typically get 1 pound, like 1 horsepower per ton is what I'm seeing online for compressors. So ideally, again, by this whole definition, if your cooling system is fixed and it's more than 1 ton, it's going to need a permit to install that. Plumbing permits don't need to be pulled. On to our next section here. Plumbing permits don't need to be pulled if you're trying to stop leaks or clear clogs. You don't need to pull a permit for that. But you do need to pull permits if you are installing new pipes or fixtures, or you're messing with any pipes that are concealed. So anything that's truly out of sight, you need to pull a permit for. But I mean, even from experience, I'll tell you that like most of the pipes that I see leak are underneath sinks, and those are fairly accessible. And like the drain lines, yeah, that's like that I can see will not need a permit. By this definition, though, it appears that if we're gonna have replacing angle stops, it looks like that's gonna need a permit to actually, I mean, do that code compliant wise, because then we're changing like a fixture or fixture is the wrong word, but a valve. Sorry, pipes, fixtures, and valves are all going to need it. So that would be something that would need a permit. Um, the only, actually, we'll jump into, before I jump into one caveat here about the plumbing system. I forget. I'll tell you here. All right. So one thing that it'll say later on in the code is that it'll say if you have to cut into a wall for something, it's not considered a minor repair anymore, and that's deemed as something that needs to be permitted. So what I see happen is um, you'll see the secondary overflow for a tub, or I guess the primary drain for the tub, that will leak from time to time. And if that is like what, like a P trap sitting underneath there. And so in a regular circumstance underneath the sink, you can make that repair and it's not, doesn't need a permit according to these definitions here, right? However, once we go underneath the tub and we look underneath there and we have to like make that repair and to whatever P trap sitting in there, that needs to be permitted. So they're talking about like if it's concealed or you need to like break drywall or cut into a beam or something, you need to start pulling permits for all this stuff. But for the everyday, leak that I see underneath a kitchen sink or a bathroom sink, no permits needed for that. Plumbing permits don't need to be pulled. Onto our next section here. Plumbing permits don't need to be pulled if you're trying to stop leaks or clear clogs. You don't need to pull a permit for that. But you do need to pull permits if you are installing new pipes or fixtures, or you're messing with any pipes that are concealed. So anything that's truly out of sight, you need to pull a permit for. But I mean, even from experience, I'll tell you. Okay, uh, on to the next like section of this. So we talked about permits, when what the definition is. We talked about building permits, and then we talked about a whole section about like the fences and the retaining walls and the pools that are more than 24 inches deep and like that whole thing, right? Then we talked about MEPs, and pretty much like you could get away with, yeah, we talked about the exceptions for the MEP permits, and then now we're going to talk into the other parts of permits that are included in the code. So emergency repairs. If you need to do an emergency repair for a system in the home, you can do the repair and then apply for the permit after the fact. But in all other instances, the code says you need to apply for the permit before you go do that emergency repair. Um, Permits are repairs. Permits are needed for ordinary repairs, but repairs aren't deemed as ordinary if the wall needs to be cut or a beam needs to be cut. You're changing egress, you're changing the occupancy, or you're changing MEPs. So if you're making some significant change to a building like that, that's when things really like get a little more important. Like, for example, if you for some reason decide to close off a window, because I think it's such an easy example, if you decided to close off a window for a bedroom, you're affecting the egress, and that wouldn't fall under MEPs. It doesn't really fall under other parts of like the exceptions that we listed out earlier, but it would fall under something that is now like affecting the building, the occupants in a real way that they're not going to realize, and it's easy for people to overlook. So um, next one, public service agencies don't need to pull permits. I guess if you're not working in a public service agency, you don't need to really worry about that. One thing I think is interesting about that is if you have a government program or whatever, right, that's hiring a GC to build an office, which happens here in Vegas all the time, and I think it happens probably everywhere, that GC needs to pull the permit, or the architect, or whoever's going to be pulling the permits, whether the architect, GC, owner, whatever the hell, like they need to pull a permit for that work. But the utility company going out there and doing whatever they want to do, they can just do that. They don't need to pull a permit. Application, and here's some just main bullet points of what the application for a permit will look like. It needs to describe the work. It needs to describe where the work's going to be done at. It needs to describe the use and the occupancy, which I think is very important, considering like, you know, if you're in a building that requires like, I don't know, one toilet per 200 square feet, and you make changes to that, or you start eliminating toilets or whatever, or that's important, because a lot of these code requirements are depend on the occupancy and the use of the space. So you have to include that in the permit, and oftentimes the architect's going to do that. For our case, it's pretty much just going to be residential, unless we fall into one of those categories where we talk about we're going to make it like the home of like a group home or a medical care facility or janitorial custodial facility for old people or whatever the heck that's called. You need to write down. You also need to include construction documents. Generally, just talking about drawings. Dollar value. The dollar value becomes important later on in the code because they'll say that if your dollar value is above X, you're not deemed as doing repairs to the building and you have to comply. The whole building has to comply with the new code. And I think it's over 50% or something like that, but that's where this whole dollar value thing comes into play. The next one is a signature by the applicant, and you have to agree that you're going to be doing things the right way and you're the one that's applying for the permit. Uh, and other relevant data. That's kind of like on a case by case basis. And when I used to apply for permits, like they would ask you for the most random stuff sometimes. And I swear the guys that work at the city don't know all the stuff. Like between one guy and the next, you'll get different requirements from each guy. That's all, as much as it should be that way, it just is that way. So they'll ask you for stuff and you can make the call on how much you want to fight them on the information you provide or don't provide. Next thing is that permits expire by the code after 180 days of no action. So if you apply for a permit, you decide to never pull it, 190 days passes by, you have to reapply for the permit. They're going to close your thing out and just pretend it didn't exist, right? The other thing is that if you don't call an inspection for 180 days, that is another sign that they are probably just going to, your permit's going to expire. You can do renewals on your permit to like keep it going and all that. Those do cost money, I believe. You also need to get ahead of it. If you open up a closed permit, you can get yourself into a bit of a jam. I remember being in a situation where I think we had a permit that expired, and then when we reopened it, they said that we needed to comply with the newer building code, which can be a real pain in the neck. And you don't want to get yourself in a situation like that. So staying out of it and keeping your permits open, always a really good idea. This last point on this page, validity. If you get a permit, it's not an approval for a mistake on the plans. This is like probably the biggest point that I want to make to like everyone that like builds homes out there, every contractor that's out there. This argument, and I'll hear this all the time. They're gonna be like, "Hey man, we just built it per plan. So the building department said it was fine, so we're gonna build that way." No, no. Like this like the plan checker can't reasonably and by any means catch every single mistake that can possibly be on a set of plans. There's so many building codes out there, all designed to keep things affordable, keep things functional, keep things from people from dying in buildings and stuff. And so like if there is a mistake on the plans, it's just because you have it on approved plans doesn't mean that every code violation you make is now approved. They can still stop you, right? And you need to be vigilant of whatever codes that ideally brushing up and being a good student like this and like listening to stuff like this, so that you can get those things cleared up. Obviously, in like almost every case in human history, the earlier you can prevent a problem, the cheaper it's going to be. And this is like another thing here. So validity is not like just because they gave you a permit does not mean they're excusing all the code violations on your plan. You can still get your permit suspended or revoked for code violations. We just talked about that a second ago. The permit must be on site until the completion of the project. Another thing that I see people goof up with all the time is that they don't have their permits on site. You can get yourself in trouble for that. You can honestly get a pretty good fine for that. Next one, everyone that is performing work on the building is responsible for being code compliant. So they immediately shove it back off on everyone. if you have a group of idiots on your project that don't know anything and you have no one even remotely supervised to you know, do things the right way, they're going to get themselves in trouble, and the responsibility falls back on them. But ultimately, if you're either a GC or a specialized contractor, it falls back on you guys for having people that don't know the codes that are relevant to them. And the last thing that they bring up in this permit section, which is massive, as we've been talking about for a minute, is that the building inspector can inspect the site before issuing a permit. And this really comes into play when we are doing, um, gosh, construction on existing buildings. And yeah, that's where it really comes into play. I like in the remodels that I've done, like they just, yeah, they're allowed to come out and check your building out to make sure that you're doing what you're saying you're going to do. You're not doing anything kind of hokey or out of the place or something like that. I think another really good example, actually, here's a great story for this. They're allowed to check out your site before they issue a permit. I was a young buck on a project many moons ago, and we wanted to get a jump start on, gosh, we had a grading permit, but we decided that my boss decided that we'd start digging out foundations and digging out underground utilities before we got an approved permit so we could get ahead, right? Well, the building department came out and they saw that and they were on us like a fucking hawk the entire time about everything that we've done after the fact. And like, very respectful, but they're like, you guys lied and now we're going to do this. Don't take that out on me though. I wasn't a liar. My old bosses were liars. So, but I guess ultimately just trying to do the same thing. Put themselves in a risky position though of like building stuff without a permit. Who knows if they rejected something, how much of a pain in the neck that would be. So this kind of concludes a section for building permits. Hopefully you guys found that pretty useful. I know I'm going to be listening to this again because I'll need a refresher. If you found anything that you would like to add to the conversation, drop a comment somewhere, let me know, and we can get added to version 2 of all these things that come out at some point.